We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We have kind of a busy agenda here, and we're going to try to do our best to go ahead and get these three bills out today so we can get three more, hopefully maybe even four on Thursday. With that being said, Diana, would you please call roll?
Representative Berger,
Here.
Representative Nemec,
Here.
Representative Obermueller,
Excused.
Representative O'Hearn,
Here.
Representative Pendergraft,
Here.
Representative Smith,
Here.
Representative Stivar,
Present.
Representative Wiley,
Here.
Chairman Brown.
Here. All right. Committee and public, we started discussion on House Bill 156 last week, got through the introduction of it and started some discussion, but we did not take public testimony. So that's where we're going to start off with today. We're going to open up public testimony from anybody beyond the Secretary of State's office. Do we have any other agencies interested? Please come on up. Ms. Langford, if you would please introduce yourself to the committee for the record, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. With me at the table here today is Chief Deputy Dale Davis from Laramie County. And then, Mr. Chairman, I have a request. Our president, Malcolm Irvin, is on Zoom. He's snowed in Wheatland, and he planned to be here, but the road's closed. So if he could join us also, that would be helpful. Thank you. And I believe he'll kick us off. So.
Mr. Malcolm, when you are in, can he hear me yet? Okay. Mr. Malcolm, when you are in, go ahead and turn on your camera. Please introduce yourself for the record, and then the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Malcolm Irvin. I'm the Platte County Clerk and also the president of the County Clerks Association. I appreciate you letting me join by Zoom. My intent was to be there. I may shock all of you when I tell you it's windy in Wheatland and Chugwater, so I'm not able to make it, so I appreciate being able to join virtually. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate Representative Locke's interest in this topic and his desire to address the concerns that an elector does not reside where they claim to reside. However, we believe that this legislation conflates those two different standards of identification. We believe the concerns expressed through this legislation should be addressed with voter registration rather than voter ID. In 2019, our association worked with then Representative Gray to develop a voter ID law that worked. Previous versions of the bill created significant administrative concerns, but the bill in 2019 delivered a voter ID law that could be administered with minimal disruption to the voter, no cost to counties, and most importantly, a law that allowed election judges to say with certainty that the person in front of them was who they claimed to be, which is, of course, the intent of voter ID. At no point, however, was voter ID intended to be a way of determining an individual's qualifications to vote, because that is the role of voter registration. If on election day a voter stands before a poll book and has not been registered, that voter will not be provided a ballot, even if they produce an acceptable form of ID under 22-102A Romanet 39. Rather, the voter will be required to register to vote, which entails a stricter identification standard because registration is the point at which our office determines a voter's qualifications, which brings us to our first concern with this proposed legislation, which is that if passed, this would cause voter ID to be stricter than voter registration. This would result in voters who are entitled to vote being denied their right at the polls. Why do I say this? Registration is supposed to be the gate through which potential voters are determined to be qualified or not. The ID produced at the poll book is supposed to be the mechanism to determine the person who was previously determined to be qualified is who they claim to be. When voter ID is stricter than registration, that will inevitably lead to voter confusion and frustration. In many places in our great state, there is no street mail delivery like the towns of Hartville and Guernsey in my county. The individual in those towns do not have their physical addresses printed on their driver's licenses or passports, which Mary Langford will be showing you. Instead, those folks only have their PO box printed on their driver's license and passport. During the 2022 election, the most common form of ID election judges examined was the Wyoming driver's license. In portions of this state where a PO box is displayed on the driver's license, each and every voter who chooses to produce their Wyoming driver's license will be required to produce two forms of identification. Therefore, folks who move and update their address with WYDOT are not provided with a new driver's license or ID card, even though they have complied with state law and notified WYDOT of their relocation. Should those voters whose PO boxes that are displayed on their driver's license at no fault of their own be required to carry multiple documents? If the answer to that question is yes, then without a doubt, we will see longer lines and increased voter frustration. The most common complaint we hear in our offices are those of long lines or the denial of a voter who is adamant they are entitled. This legislation also raises our association's primary concern as it relates to the election code, which is a vague definition of residence. Our law does not establish the amount of time that an individual must reside in an address before being entitled to vote. So let me hypothesize about the voter who closes on a new home on election day and as such has not received the documents required in this bill, or the homeless individual, or the student who lives in the dorms. How are those situations addressed? Is it our fear that it is our fear that a stricter voter ID law than registration requirements would encourage voters to lie about their addresses in the instances of voters who have moved but failed to obtain sufficient mail, or the denial to vote? Again, the area the question of qualification should be posed is in registration. Mr. Chairman, our primary concern with the requirement to produce proof of residency at the poll book rather than at the registration table is who will be implementing that policy decision, and that's our election judges. Members of our community who have engaged in the democratic process by serving as election judges will be the ones who face scrutiny at the polls when a potential voter who they recognize as their neighbor, spouse, or friend is required to produce further documentation after clearing the hurdle of registration. Mr. Chairman, I want to be crystal clear. Our association does not oppose voter ID. We worked with the legislature in 2019 to ensure that a voter ID bill could be administered well, which it has done. All we are doing today is expressing our concern that the ideas of this bill are misplaced because they belong in voter registration once the question of residency has been answered. Therefore, we would ask that this committee strike lines 13 through 23 on page 2. Before finishing, I must speak about the repealing of the use of student IDs. As Secretary Gray said on Thursday, a non-US citizen is able to obtain a student ID, which is completely true. Just as a student under the age of 18 is able to obtain a student ID from a Wyoming public school. However, neither of those individuals would be able to register to vote. In 2019, we testified in favor of allowing student IDs as acceptable forms of voter ID and continue to do so today. Because the purpose of voter ID is to determine a voter's identification, not their qualification to vote. Obtaining a student ID from the University of Wyoming, Wyoming Community College, or a Wyoming public school is not as simple as walking up to the registrar and requesting an ID. As such, we ask that this committee strike the repeal of the student ID as an acceptable form of ID. In closing, Mr. Chairman, we understand the intent of this bill to ensure that citizens of Wyoming and only the citizens of Wyoming vote in our elections. Over the last years, we have faced growing skepticism, false accusations of wrongdoing, and innuendo of impropriety. So we understand the pressures you face to address these concerns. We too want to address the concerns of our constituents, but we want to ensure they are addressed in a manner that will work and in the appropriate place. That place is voter registration. We ask that this committee provided our association the opportunity to work through these concerns during the interim in partnership with the Secretary of State's office. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Irvin. Any questions for Mr. Irvin Committee? And seeing that you're snowed in, no worries on allowing you to testify. That's what happens in January and February in Wyoming. So thank you very much, Mr. Irvin. We do appreciate it. Ms. Langford, do you have anything further to add?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a couple of short things just to hit home on what we're really looking at. I brought my driver's license. My driver's license, I live in Sublette County and I live about 3 miles out of town. My driver's license has my post office box on it because when you get your driver's license, it's your mailing address. So it's not a residence address. I'd have to provide 2 other forms of residency to be able to vote with my driver's license. And also, I'm sure since this is the Transportation Committee, you've had experience with Real ID. This is a Real ID. It's got all kinds of documentation behind it with residency and birth certificates and all that kind of stuff. The voter has, and I have used my driver's license to register to vote. All of that supports my voter registration. All I want to do is be able to show my picture and say this face is this person and compare it to the poll list that I'm a registered voter in Sublette County. Another ID, my passport. So if you looked at your passport lately, I was kind of surprised because I hadn't paid much attention. My passport was issued about almost 10 years ago. On your passport, it says you are a US citizen. It says my birth date on it. It has where I was born, which is not Wyoming. And it doesn't have anything else that identifies that I live in Wyoming, just that I am a US citizen that was born in Colorado. So that's my passport. Last example, I have a Medicare card. Yep, I'm old enough to have one of those. It has nothing on it except for my name. And it's an acceptable ID that can be used to vote. But there isn't anything there that indicates that I'm a Wyoming resident or anything else. Again, I'd have to provide, with this bill, I'd have to provide more documentation. Just to drive home the whole point, all of that's taken care of at the time of registration. Again, your voter ID is there to show that you are who you are on the day of election, shown to an election judge who indicates that they've looked at your ID, has noted what they saw as for an ID, that it was a Wyoming driver's license or whatever was provided, and that you match the voter or the poll list that you're registered to vote, and then you're allowed to vote. And with that, Mr. Chairman and committee, I'd be happy to stand for question.
Any questions for Ms. Langford? Representative Pendergraft.
Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering if you're aware that many envelopes are delivered through the U.S. Postal Service that include a P.O. box and a physical address as well. And the sequence of the same determines where that mail is delivered. Have you seen that happen?
Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, I can say that that's happened to me at home.
Follow up, please.
Follow up.
A follow-up question then, when a person goes to acquire their driver's license and they have to put the address, is it particularly onerous to have to present a utility bill or something to locate them as a physical address and then have that put on the driver's license as well?
Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I don't believe YDOT wants residential addresses. They want your mailing address on your driver's license. And there's folks here that could stand to that. One other piece of information along that same line, there are bills in the works right now to allow concealed carry permits to be used for identification for voting. And concealed carry permits are also sent to your mailing address as opposed to your residential address. So you would have to produce more documentation to be able to use your concealed carry.
Follow up, sure.
Mr. Chairman, I've had concealed carry. I've lived out in the country. I've had mail delivered to post office boxes. Is it unreasonable, in your estimation, for us to be moving toward a photo ID policy within the state so that every voter by a certain point down the road would have to present a photo ID? Do you think that is an unreasonable goal?
So I'll allow the question, but Representative Pendergraft, we are not discussing photo ID at this point in this bill, but Ms. Langford, you're more than welcome to reply if you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, we have we have statutes in place right now for voter ID. And there are acceptable forms of voter ID that were established 2 years ago in 21. And we also have acceptable forms of ID for registration, which are actually the same forms of ID for both. You know, the determination to move further is not mine. That would be my response.
Thank you. Any further questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Irvin was talking, he mentioned the registration process being an important key to verify everything. As far as that goes, how often does that get updated or verified?
Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, so your voter registration, you do it initially. And then every time that you vote, you're given the opportunity to update your address, update any other information that's pertinent to that, change your party. But you know, you're given that opportunity and you vote every 2 years. So it is kind of a living, you know, it's a living document.
Follow up.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do they require proof of residency at that time currently?
Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, as far as proof of residency, I go in and say I've moved. And that's one of the issues with residency in relation to this. I don't have to prove anything if I'm updating my residency information for voter registration.
Thank you.
Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You guys, county clerk sent out a card that says, you know, this is your precinct, your Senate district, your House district. Can they use that card to come in and say, this is my address, I can vote? Along with a
Langford?
picture ID?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe so.
Follow up.
Follow up.
How do them cards get mailed?
Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I have no idea because I have no experience with sending out those cards.
I will say,
I'm gonna-
Ms. Langford, you're absolutely just fine. I know that is specific to some counties and
I'm going to hand off to Laramie
to
County.
Laramie County may have more information on this.
He
Yes.
might have an answer.
That's what I want.
Please introduce yourself for the record.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Dale Davis. I'm the Chief Deputy for Laramie County Clerk. As far as I know, if a person requests that card, then we'll mail that card out to them.
Follow up.
Follow up.
How do I want to put this? I'm just gonna bring it out. My son moved to Oregon last year. He actually got the card in the mail with his Oregon address on it. And then he got another card from Oregon where he'd registered up there. So I've got both cards.
That
Is there a question there,
That's
Representative?
the
Stivar?
question I have. How did that happen?
Okay.
that I don't know. I would need to check that out. Because
We'll talk offline. sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any further questions? Ms. Langford and or Dale, Mr. Davis, I am curious, this happened to me, as the owner of a rental. I had a very interesting prospect a couple years ago where I had a military service member that was deployed overseas, utilized one of my addresses on one of my rentals and was able to utilize that address as his voting precinct. And this process, as that's allowed underneath US federal law with how they do this. How would this particular bill affect a US service member in the voter ID process in requesting any type of absentee ballot and or the ability to vote where they say they're from?
Mr. Chairman, those folks, well, military folks have a little bit of leeway as far as when they vote and that type of thing. But if you were in a situation where you have someone that has to provide their ID to be able to obtain an absentee ballot, which is out there on the horizon as well, it would be difficult because they may have a lease agreement, they may not. Everybody has to live someplace and has to claim a resident someplace. And that's part of the problem with our residency law as well, is that it's possible not to be able to come up with those forms of ID. Particularly, I know in my case, I don't know if the utility bills are in my name at home. Because I didn't sign up for the utilities at my place. My husband did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you so much, clerks. Appreciate all your hard work and thank you for keeping our election safe.
Thank you.
All right, we will go ahead and open this up to any further public comment. And please don't be shy. Go ahead and fill the seats and just come up as you're ready to go. Please make sure you introduce yourself for the record. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Moody here in Laramie County, and I was a poll watcher for a general election. I just want to say I 100% support this bill, including the amendment to prohibit college IDs as a valid form of identification to vote. Common sense. College school IDs do not allow effective verification and are easier to forge compared to driver's license, concealed carry permits, state ID, passport, or military ID. I can say as a poll watcher at LCCC here in town, I saw out of state and out of county tags in the parking lot, one from Colorado, two from Albany County, one from Platte County. I did report this to the Secretary of State. Ohio just enacted a House Bill 458 that requires photo ID. So you're required to show a driver's license, a passport, or military ID, no college ID. So Ohio just passed this law and it's now law there in the state of Ohio. So I'm asking for an aye vote and consider the amendment and not allowing college IDs there, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Any questions for Mr. Moody, committee? Being none, thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you, sir.
Moody. Mr. Laycock, please introduce yourself for the record. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chairman Brown, committee. Good looking group of guys up there. My name is Tom Laycock, Associate State Director for AARP Wyoming. I appreciate the chance to talk to you today about HB 156. I also like to thank the bringer of the bill for having taking the time to talk to us about a few of our concerns that we had with the original bill that came out and sort of a willingness to work on that with an amendment. So just as a bit of history for the 6 new members, as well as folks who may be watching online and here in the room. Before the 2021 legislative session, AARP Wyoming and then Representative Chuck Gray and we worked together when we found out Representative Gray wanted to run a photo ID to vote bill. At AARP, we're very interested and supportive of safe and secure elections. Our concern is we just wanted to make sure older voters weren't taken out of the equation. So more specifically, Federal Highway Administration numbers tell us that between 16% of older adults between 70 and 84 no longer carry a driver's license. Over the age of 85, that jumps up to 40% of folks. Okay. So for that reason, HB 75 in 2021 was written to allow for Medicare and Medicaid cards for folks who no longer carry a license. So the way that we kind of looked into that, and the reason that we went that direction was we actually worked with the National Council on State Legislatures to figure out what other states do. And every state does kind of something. Some states go really liberal with it. Other states are really pretty buttoned down, but there tends to be sort of an outlet for an older adult that doesn't carry a driver's license. We kind of settled in on Medicare and Medicaid cards after talking to the state of West Virginia. So we actually put together a webinar between our own legislators as well as Secretary of State's office in West Virginia. West Virginia has been taking Medicare cards for a long time. And they said, here's the thing, 99% of people are going to walk in with a driver's license. That's great. For that extra 1%, this seems to be working pretty well. So in doing so, we also agreed to putting in a sunset for the Medicare card by 2029. And our thinking there was, let's allow for the Secretary of State's office to get some data. Who's actually using this? Or is this something that we put in there that, really no one's using? The other thing it's going to let us do is going to get us a couple cycles by which we're able to talk to some of our older adults as they get that license renewal in the mail. And maybe they're not going to renew the license again, but this would allow them to request a state ID. So that's really what we were trying to do with that piece. So interestingly enough, during the last election cycle, one of our statewide radio networks did a really well-intentioned thing. They were putting together PSAs where they were saying, hey, everyone, this is the first election cycle where you're going to need an ID. They mistakenly said photo ID. And that may have been a good litmus test for us because our phones lit up for about 3 or 4 weeks after that happened with folks who were just concerned. They'd given up the driver's license. They'd made the right decision to stop driving, didn't get a state ID, and we're a little freaked out that they're not going to be able to vote. So we were able to talk to them and kind of walk them through that. But, it's certainly something that you're going to see starting at the end of this year. We're going to start, kind of priming that pump a little bit to let folks know that this is coming by 2029. And here's kind of how to do it. And YDOT has been a tremendous partner in that effort, and we sure appreciate it. So as I said, we appreciate the bringer of the bill for taking our concerns into consideration. And there is a request for those who use Medicare and Medicare cards to bring a rent receipt, insurance bill, other piece of mail to verify the address. We think that's understandable. Don't oppose that provision. So that I'll be happy to take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Laycock? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Laycock. Gail? Oh, okay. We'll go to Jen. Jen, please introduce yourself for the record and floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and esteemed committee members. My name is Jen Lowe. I'm Executive Director at the Quality State Policy Center. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that advocates for fair elections and transparent government. I would like to start by recognizing that Wyoming's elections are safe and secure. It is a testament to our 23 county clerks and our Secretary of State's office that no one has seriously challenged the integrity of our elections. Last November, I served as an election judge in my home county, Lincoln County. I served with 3 of my neighbors and we had a lovely day. For working a full day from about 6:30 a.m. to 8 p.m., I earned just less than a couple $100. I made a few extra dollars for taking a training and a brief exam. The neighbors I worked with were a little bit older than I am, and 2 of the 3 were retirees, just good folks doing their civic duty. I am wondering what will happen to them when they accept an expired ID. I'll tell you what will happen to them. They could be charged up to $1,000 or 6 months in jail. Current statute 22-26-120 states, if the election code does not impose a specific penalty for the willful violation of a provision prohibiting a specific act or requiring the discharge of a specific duty, whoever knowingly commits a violation or fails to discharge the duty is guilty of a misdemeanor punishable by the penalty I just described. Considering that many of our county clerks struggle to find people to work as election judges, I'm not sure how much this will help. I would also like to point out that notaries are able to accept expired IDs for up to 3 years, and they are certified through the Secretary of State's office. I would like to thank you for your time and for your service to the great state of Wyoming. I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have.
Committee, any questions for Ms. Lowe? Seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Lowe. Gail, please introduce yourself to the committee. The floor is yours.
Gail Simmons, Civics 307. A couple of things. First of all, I want to acknowledge the president of the Clerks Association who covered most of the, quite a few of the concerns I had, including conflating the purpose of registration and the purpose of voter ID. My question is, what is the problem in Wyoming that is being addressed? Has it been verified and has it been quantified? My concern is that we pass legislation based on facts, not fear, or on actions that we believe may have taken place elsewhere. So on the proof of the individual, that photograph is not just the elderly on Medicare and Medicaid who don't have an ID, but also the disabled who also do not get a voter ID. My father died at 89 years. He always, except for the time that he was at school in Colorado and serving in the United States, well, in the armed services, lived in Wyoming in the same county. He did not voluntarily agree to no longer drive. That was forced upon him by his loving children. And that was a point of significant pain for him. So now, with his expired driver's license, which actually had the P.O. box that he received his mail, but he had not changed his residence in the preceding 15 years, 7 voting cycles. And I would then have to tell him, yeah, sorry to put salt on an open wound, but you're going to have to re-up your driver's license, which you cannot use, or get a voter ID. The other thing on a question, Mr. Chair, that was asked about a card that showed up as a mailing address, I would like to point out that I have been a registered and voting voter in this state, in my county, since 1974. That includes 17 years in the active duty Navy, where my mailing address changed about every 2 years, but my home of record, my residence for legal voting purposes, did not change. When I retired from the Navy, my mother was down here, happened to know the Secretary of State, popped her head in and said, "Hey, Kathy, my daughter is retiring from the Navy. What does she have to do to stay a valid voting individual in Wyoming?" And the answer was, find out what she has to do to become registered somewhere else and don't do that. So for the next 20 years, I lived at 3 or 4 different places while I worked for General Electric, and my home of official record stayed the same. In fact, I had purchased my parents' home where I now live. So my official home of record was still there. My driver's license didn't show it. Nothing showed it. I'd actually have to bring along the deed to the house that I owned. So not very happy with it. So my recommendation is, first, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you don't know whether it's broke or not, find out first and then fix it if you need to. My recommendation is to table this, cover it in the interim, get documented proof that in fact there is a problem, and then address based on the least restriction on voting capabilities that addresses that problem. And I stand for questions.
Questions for Ms. Simmons? Seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Simmons. Ms. Herman, please introduce yourself to the committee and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman and Committee. My name is Marguerite Herman, and I'm here for the League of Women Voters of Wyoming. And I'll try not to repeat verbatim previous testimony, but agreeing what Mr. Urban said and what the 2 other previous witnesses before me have said. I would just like to say that we're opposed to this bill largely because it seems to impose an additional restriction without a benefit. And if you're going to restrict access to the ballot box in any way, there should be a concomitant benefit, addressing a problem, easing something, and there doesn't seem to be anything here. It was asked, is it unreasonable to ask for a photo ID? I would ask that before a restriction and requirement is added, the real question should be, is it necessary to make our election secure, free, and fair? And I would respond with the answer, no, it doesn't seem to be that. And the idea of disallowing now Medicaid, Medicare cards, I would actually suggest that if what the purpose of a voter ID is to sort of, without doing too much repetition here, is to make sure you are not impersonating someone else in the poll books, that you are not trying to take someone else's registration and use it to your own. What do you have to do? Well, you've got some kind of an ID to show, and I don't know if there's any evidence that there's a lot of impersonation going on, but let's say you know maybe there is, and like Ms. Simmons says, let's have the data, and then maybe that will help us design a cure. And actually, rather than deleting any of these IDs, I would actually suggest adding one more. An ID that has a picture on it would be a state employee ID. The little badges they carry have pretty good quality pictures on it. That also would assure that you are, there's your face, that's your name, you're one and the same person. You're not pretending to be Joe Blow down the block. You are who you say you are. And really, that's the point of showing an ID at the polls, is to just not impersonating somebody else. And so I would say anything that achieves that, at the least, and I sort of, what you said, you should do, what is the least onerous thing to assure non-impersonation? And I would say that this bill is not necessary unless we learn that in fact there is widespread impersonation going on with the current restrictions in place. If they're working, then I suggest we keep those until we know otherwise. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Herman? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Herman.
Thank you.
Any further public testimony? Please. Introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Mara McManaman, a resident in Torrington, Wyoming and Goshen County. I'm a fourth generation Wyomingite and a disabled veteran. I would like to testify in support of this bill. I agree with this bill 100%. We need to preserve the integrity of our elections, and this bill allows for just that. This is an issue that I, as a Wyoming citizen, would like addressed. I would like you all to vote aye on this bill. Thank you, and I stand for questions.
Any questions for Ms. McManaman? Seeing none, thank you so much. Sir, please introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Gary Brown, citizen of Cheyenne, Wyoming. I'm in favor of this bill. And there's been things addressed here as that how people would have IDs, picture IDs without having a driver's license. The state of Texas, the state of Georgia, and the state of Florida have IDs that they get from the DMV that are just voter IDs, and they provide them free. So this is something that Wyoming could look at doing.
Any questions for Mr. Brown? I do have one for you, Mr. Brown. You just mentioned those states, just out of curiosity, if you know if those voter IDs in those states have addresses on them or not, or if they are just photo IDs.
I personally have not seen them. I know of a person, a friend of mine, that lives in Texas. And from my understanding, it has their address on them.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Brown. Mr. Laycock. Oh,
Sorry, sir. Once again, Tom Laycock, AARP Wyoming. I was actually looking at NCSL's voter ID page today, and Mr. Brown is absolutely right. They do offer a state issued voter ID, and the example I saw did have an address on it.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Laycock. Appreciate the clarification. Mr. Secretary.
Really quick here, just clarifying a couple things, as it was 5 days ago when we testified. So thank you. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State, and Joe Rubino's to my right, our General Counsel and Chief Policy Director. You know, couple things I wanted to clarify that last question. You know, one of the things that came in on third reading on HB 75 in 2021 was we have that provision, state IDs. Somebody can get those for free. And that is an acceptable identification, and we removed any fee on those state IDs. And if you are at the DMV, I was just there a couple of weeks ago changing my address, and it's relatively prominent there that you can do that, at least the Cheyenne one. You know, I do want to emphasize for the committee, and I know you're aware of it, but I just want to make sure, you know, there are 5 concepts in this bill. And so I know wherever you fall on any of them, I just keep in mind, I mean, it's on a spectrum. There's some things I think with a lot of consensus, particularly the pages 2 lines 9 through 11. I like the bill, but you know, I certainly understand the, and I do appreciate, I want to emphasize too, the ARP, you know, they worked really hard to get us down there on HB 75. And I do appreciate that. And I'm looking forward here. This does not pass that at the, you know, the end of the decade here. We had a tough start of this decade. But the start of the next decade, we'll have true voter ID in Wyoming with the current statute. So I'm excited about that. And I just wanted to emphasize that there are a lot of concepts here. And I think that stuff on lines 9 through 11 on page 2, the expiration piece, I would really appreciate if we could clean that up. And I think the student ID, I mean, anyway, I mean, the clerks weighed in on that, but I think that's another one. And so anyway, wanted to emphasize that. Thank you.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. It's always
Yes.
good to see you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Yes,
Question
certainly.
and some follow-ups. By what percentage did you win your election, Mr. Secretary?
Representative Pendergraft, that is outside the scope of this bill, so please keep it
I,
to the
okay,
frame of the bill.
and
please.
let me preface it by this. We heard further testimony or earlier testimony, Mr. Chairman, that if it's not broke, don't fix it. And my line of questioning is meant to prove that indeed it may be, if not broken, at least fractured. It's my belief that the Secretary and Wyoming's U.S. representative both won their elections by a pretty substantial margin. And one of their platforms was people were not confident in our elections. Also, if I may continue briefly.
Certainly.
I don't remember the details, perhaps the good secretary remembers better than I, but there was a group of people within Wyoming who attempted to do a manual count just to prove that indeed the claims were true, that this election was accurate. They were not allowed to ever do that. And so in a lot of minds among my constituents is the question of, well, why not? If they're as good as they say they are, let's just prove it. And we only got to prove one little area just to do that.
Representative
So-
Pendergraft, are you on the bill or do you have a question for the Secretary of State?
The question for the secretary is, do you remember this circumstance? Would you be able to elaborate on it where people were asking to look at this? I'm just trying to establish the reason for this bill. Is there a reason to bring it?
Secretary Gray.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll appreciate your comments and maybe, you know, it is a good way maybe to wrap up the discussion on the bill because I think there's a consensus on these improvements in our statute. I really do. And I'll go to the grave believing that. I think it's really unfortunate the way some actors in forums less responsible than this try to conflate improvements in our statute with calling into question anybody's integrity or and it's really unfortunate. And I'm all about improvement. That's what I'm about. And that's what I think all of us are about in public service. And every day I get up and say, I want to improve myself. And maybe if I improve myself, I can help my fellow man and my state a little bit in the process. And that I have this tremendous opportunity that I've been placed in by my neighbors and God to be able to do that. So I think it's about improvement. And I think continuing to talk about this issue and work on some of the flaws in the voter ID statute. There were a few things, and there's actually another bill draft floating here that's probably going to be heard on Friday. An issue of voter ID, a request of an absentee made in person. And that was a loophole that some exploited to get around ID. And when we passed voter ID, it was very clear that all in-person requests that were initiated would require an ID. And it was a little loophole that some exploited or that was there. And we're going to clean that one up. So I think it's about improvement. I think there's a lot of things in this bill that do that. So appreciate the question.
Any further questions? Mr. Secretary, I did have a question. And now I'm not seeing where I wrote it down at. So if I figure it out, I will. ask you back
Okay.
up. So
Thank you.
thank you. Any further public testimony on House Bill? Oh, yes, Mr. Secretary. Representative Obermueller has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So part of the testimony here today was that this bill creates a stricter standard for voting than it does for registering. Your response to that?
Mr. Secretary.
You know, Mr. Chairman, our intent with voter ID was to try to align those things that when we were talking with former Secretary Buchanan and working out the pieces in the bill, that was the intent of it. I think they were more talking about subsection C. I think the intent of subsection C, and I don't want to speak for the bringer and why I read it. I'm like, wow, this is brilliant. I think the intent of subsection C was to work on the issue of out-of-state IDs, which paired with our residency, our lack of a clear definition of residency in our statute is a problem that we have. And that's what I was thinking more about subsection C on. Now, I'm not sure the wording quite aligns with that, the way it's worded right now. And I think there are some things we can do in terms of registration. I was just talking with Clerk Irvin about that to work on that. So, yeah, I the other thing I'd say too is in the interim, I think that question that was asked earlier about counts, we're going to work on that. The bill that was addressing that, which I think was really flawed, did get defeated. Sorry, I forgot about bringing that up. But anyway, that's an answer to your question. Yeah.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm getting the impression that you don't think this bill is ready for prime time. Would that be a good assessment of your testimony?
No, Mr. Chairman, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think this bill is ready. What I wanted to emphasize was that if you don't think pieces are, let's not drop the whole thing. And I want to make sure we fix expiration. I think there's a consensus on student ID. The Medicare and Medicaid, I was never super thrilled about where we ended on it, and I heard a lot about it on the campaign trail. However, we did get that sunset in there, and I do really appreciate Mr. Laycock and Mr. Shumway. And I think we're on the same page that we want to get the word out on where we're going to be at the end of the decade. And then subsection C, I mean, I understand. I was kind of exchanging with Clerk Irvin, talking about where they're coming from, and I understand their perspective. I may not agree with it, but I understand what they're saying, although I may not agree with it. But I wanted to emphasize for the committee, especially in light of the fact my testimony was 5 days ago, that I think no matter what, there is a piece here that I didn't hear a single testifier against. So, and I'd like to fix. So, thank you.
I did remind, you actually mentioned something that reminded me of my question to you, and that is that it was brought up that notaries are available to accept expired IDs through your office for up to 3 years. And so my question, I recognize the benefit of having a valid ID, but I am curious why a notary for something, an official document to sign off on numerous legal documents would be acceptable to your office, but a voter ID would not be qualified underneath the voter ID.
Mr. Chairman, I think we'd want to look at improving that other situation, but I think with the heightened scrutiny on elections, probably that came to the forefront. So that's why we're talking about it here. But I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that is something that I think we should really lean against expired IDs. So I think the reason it's in bill form is just because, I mean, you look at the 600 bills. I mean, I was counting it, probably 10% of the bills are related to elections. That's my guess. It's just, it's the number, you don't have a republic without a clean election. And I'm not quite, the integrity is there, but we just want to keep improving. And so that's why I think it comes to the forefront in a limited 60 days that our Constitution provides. So.
Any further questions for the Secretary? Yes, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Gray. So a couple questions. Where would you give us as a state a grade wise for voter ID? And with those last few remarks, again, can we make this bill better? Can we make it better so that we're all in this together, that we bring all of us and get the right bill?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, is it okay if I go? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Berger, I've learned over time, the 80% rule, I think the 80-20 rule is fascinating, right? Because I think sometimes that gets mischaracterized, right? I mean, let's face it. I mean, there are a few things in politics that there's a consensus on, but the reality is there's a lot that is contested. And as long as it's done in a certain way, civilly, I mean, that's okay. I mean, the implications of, this is our kids, our grandkids. I mean, the implications of what you're doing here, it's just enormous. I know I don't have to tell you that. I think there's always, and that leads to my point. I mean, these issues are always going to be contentious. I would say Representative Berger will never get 100%. I think there's always going to be certain people that are against these concepts, and I'm not saying that to disparage them, but it's just reality. So I think at some point we got to make a decision. It's a policy decision on some of these things, and I think I like the bill. I think, I understand you guys may want to amend. If you decide to amend some stuff out, I again want to emphasize that I think there are a few things here that are ready for prime time and that are good cleanups. But yeah.
Any further questions, Representative Pendergraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. Just a question for the secretary. I did hear something in testimony that I'm sure you heard too, that did pick my ears up, that needs to be cleaned up slightly in here. Would you be amenable? Would you offer some advice on an amendment that would allow for a proof of military home of record as another form of residence?
Secretary Gray.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pendergraft, I do appreciate that question. When I was hearing that testimony, I was like, we need to do a little more research on this question. I think because, in terms of the grade, I put it at a B. I mean, one of the things that we're not going to do this session, I think, that I want to look at, and I've been talking with the clerks about, and, they agree we were going to look at this, was voter ID on absentees. And there are 2 states, I believe, that have that. That's when you're really getting into, that's a whole sector that we did not deal with in voter ID. And I would say most of the UOCAVA voting, obviously, and the military voting, a lot of that's happening with absentees. So that's not subject to the current voter ID statutes, but I wanted to unpack a little. I had the same reaction you did, that I want to look into that. It's an important issue.
All right, committee, with that, we are slowly reaching into our availability for the other 2 bills. So we're going to close public comment. Committee, that brings the bill up to the dais. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move the bill.
Moved by Stivar, seconded by Smith. Okay, committee, let's go ahead and walk through this bill. It's not a very long one, but let's ensure that we work this bill, as it is a very important bill. This is where the work for our legislature gets done, is in committee. So yes, Representative Pendergraft.
As we move this, are we including then the proposed amendment that was given to us originally?
Representative Pendergraft, that'll be up to the committee as to whether or not they would like to adopt those amendments, and they can be moved at any time that anybody feels necessary. And I'll move mine at the right time. Yep. All right, so page 1. Page 2. All right, I will go ahead and I will move my amendment on page 2. And ladies and gentlemen, you have a copy of it. For those of you in the public that cannot see this, this basically deletes lines 13 through 23. And then also onto page 3, it deletes page 3, line 2, it deletes the number Roman numeral 8. And then on line 3, it deletes Roman numeral 9. And those are just for the committee's edification, that is Medicaid and Medicare. So that is the motion. I would need a second to continue.
Second.
Okay. So it's been seconded by Representative O'Hearn. I think a big portion of what I'm trying to do here is it is not our job to kill bills. It is our job to work and make bills better, and certainly recognize the intent of this. And I certainly believe that we have an idea that was brought forward. In my opinion, it is a step too far to require additional documentation above and beyond what is required, as we heard from the county clerks for registration. We're going to make it harder to vote in person. And I can think of numerous cases that I don't want to get into where this would be a hindrance, not only to the individual trying to vote, but also the poll workers. And with our lack of poll workers and the struggle that our county clerks struggle to get there, I don't feel like this is the right language that we want to see. So those are my comments. Any further comments or questions on the amendment?
Question.
Okay, question being called. All those in favor of the proposed amendment to strike lines 13 through 23 and Roman numeral 8 and 9 on page 3. Is that page 3? Yes, on page 3. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those no?
No.
That amendment passes. On page 2, I would also propose an additional amendment that nobody has a copy of, but as I was reading this, I would propose on line 11. And I would put a period at the end of expired and strike the remainder of the line. So the strike would go and includes photograph of the voter. At this point, I will wait for a second.
I'll second that.
And all this is doing, ladies and gentlemen, is if we include this language based off of the information that we just passed, the amendment that gets rid of the Medicaid and Medicare card. If we have language in statute that says it requires a photograph of the voter, we're in conflict with one another. So Medicaid and Medicare cards do not have photos. This would just, this is the two that we've just repealed in the previous amendment. So all I'm trying to do is just clean this up, that it would not have to be a photograph ID until 2029, I believe, is when that's it. So any questions or comments on the amendment?
Question.
Question on the amendment. All those in favor of the proposed amendment on line 11 to insert a period and strike the remainder of the line after the word expired, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? That amendment passes as well. All right, committee, any further amendments on section? Representative Stivar.
I'm just gonna, this question, page 1, line 4, delete required address verification on your amendment.
Correct.
Did we approve that already?
Yes, we did.
Okay,
Yep, in its entirety.
okay. I'm good then, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you for asking.
Question.
What is this? Status of the law?
So the question was just raised of whether or not anybody wants to raise Representative Locke's proposed amendment. You're certainly welcome to. What that does, committee, is this would ultimately require us to bring back in subsection C, subparagraph C, sorry, and it would require us to readopt that, and then it would put some additional work in there that would assist in some of the concerns that we did here. So this was a proposed amendment by Representative Locke, but the amendment that I brought forward and that has passed has made this one frankly irrelevant, but it's up to the committee as to their motion on this. Seeing none. Question being called. Diana, would you please call roll on House Bill 156 as amended?
All righty. Representative Berger.
Aye.
Representative Nemec.
Aye.
Representative Obermuller. Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft.
Aye.
Representative Smith.
Aye.
Representative Stivar.
Aye.
Representative Wiley.
Aye.
Chairman Brown.
No.
No? Okay. That's 8 ayes, 1 no, do pass with amendments.
Thank you, committee, for your hard work on that bill. Thank you, Secretary Gray. Appreciate it. Representative Locke, I assume you'll be carrying this on the floor. All right. Thank you so much. All right, committee, we are on to our next bill, and that is electronic payment of sales and use taxes. And this is brought to us by a freshman, Representative Larson. Welcome. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I bring you House Bill 229, electronic payment of sales and use taxes. I'll just go over a brief explanation of the bill and then go through the bill with you.
At your pleasure.
Thank you. This is an act relating to sales and use taxes, clarifying that the Department of Revenue and county treasurers may collect sales and use taxes electronically and providing for an effective date. My county treasurer, Mark Cowan, brought this issue to me, and basically what the bill does is allows the treasurers to collect sales tax. Let's say I bought a vehicle, and they can collect that payment electronically, whether that's online or sending a link to pay, or however the treasurer deems that's appropriate. And then the other part of the bill allows the treasurers to submit any collected sales and use taxes to the Department of Revenue through an online system rather than the manual system they are currently using. So page 2, it just adds into this, the first part is 39-15-107. That's the sales tax part. It just adds the department, which is the Department of Revenue, may provide an option for the return to be submitted and for any taxes to be remitted electronically. Next part will be page 4. The county treasurer may allow the taxes to be paid electronically. And then the next section is 39-16-107, which deals with use taxes. And it's the same language. The department may provide an option for the return to be submitted and for any taxes to be remitted electronically on page 5. And then on page 6, the department may provide an option for the return to be submitted and for any taxes to be remitted electronically. So I guess that's the explanation of the bill. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right, Representative Larson, thank you so much. Committee, is there any questions for Representative Larson on this bill? Seeing none, pretty straight, simple, forward bill. Representative Larson, thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, I also have an amendment. Do you want me to explain that now or wait until?
Yes, why don't you run through the amendment and then we'll work that as we go through the bill.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this amendment is an appropriation of $228,000. So after I drafted this bill, I got with the Department of Revenue, and they're going to need some additional IT funding to implement this as far as the treasurers submitting the collected taxes to the Department of Revenue online. And so if you have any questions about that specific process, I believe the Department of Revenue is here to answer those questions.
Okay, committee, any questions on the amendment that was brought forward? Okay, thank you, Representative Larson. I do see, I'm being pointed at. I see somebody from the Department of Revenue, and I'll go ahead and open it up to the Department of Revenue for any questions, testimony. You guys have been all over this building this year. I think this is the only committee you haven't been in front of so far. Welcome, please state your name for the record, and the floor is yours.
Hello, Chairman Brown, representatives. I'm Krista Urick. I'm the Administrative Services Administrator for the Department of Revenue.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Brett Fanning, and I'm the Excise Tax Administrator here at the Wyoming Department of Revenue. And with that, Mr. Chairman, just a couple points that Christy and I have noted. I think that combining the two of us together, we can kind of walk through the implications of this legislation, if that pleases you.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as Representative Larson was speaking to, this bill really outlines two kind of parts that are going on with this legislation. So the first part here is allowing the county treasurers to submit an online electronic return and then the payment of those taxes electronically as well. So what's important to note here is that the department does already allow electronic filing. That is important, but I know exactly where this bill came from. And that is the fact that the county treasurers currently right now with our IT program do not have the ability to submit electronic returns to us. Now they can pay electronically. They certainly can do that. But this programming for the return that they specifically file to us is not available via our online portal. So that's the important distinction here, is that right now we don't have the ability for them to file electronically with us.
Mr. Fanning, hold on just a second. Representative Berger,
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a quick question?
please.
Why?
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, outstanding question. It's limited to funding. It's an IET funding type issue. Now, the vast majority of our returns, like I said, can be done electronically. But there are a couple unique things with this county treasurer return that when we were updating our system, that funding wasn't available to do that program.
Please continue, Mr. Fanning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that's the main part of where the department comes into play with this. Now, Representative Larson did reach out to me, and we do use a third-party IT contractor. They're the ones who maintain our system. And then I do have that fiscal note available if you wanted additional details as well, Mr. Chairman. Now, the second part of this bill is more geared towards the county treasurers. And so when this part of the bill came up, I did reach out to my education and taxability manager, because it's important to note that between Christy and I and my staff, we have daily communication with our county treasurers. And that can be anything from tax distribution to the taxability of motor vehicles. So when the county treasurers are submitting these returns into us, they're submitting sales tax that they collect on motor vehicles. And so that's where this return comes from. Now, the second part of this legislation, Mr. Chairman, I'm not the best person to talk to about. So allowing the county treasurers to pay tax electronically, I'm trying to think about how this would work logistically, because when you go in there and you buy a new vehicle and then you walk into your county treasurer's office, generally that county treasurer is going to need to look at that bill of sale or that invoice. Sometimes those invoices can be complicated. And so they make a taxability determination on how much tax that you owe. And then they tell you how much tax is due. So again, Mr. Chairman, I'm not the right person to logistically talk about the second part of this bill, but the department stands for any question on the first part of that bill.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Fanning or the department as it relates to this bill? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would these programs save you guys cost in the long run by not having to do a bunch of data entry that they're mailing in and so forth?
Mr. Fanning or Ms. Yerk?
Chairman Brown, Representative Smith, it would probably be a little bit more efficient for the availability for them to file this electronically. It's just a matter of the additional work that we go through right now to ensure that they're filed correctly and that the calculations are correct.
Follow up?
Follow up, please.
And then is there a reason that they wouldn't be able to use your current system with like sales tax? Because I know I go in monthly and pay sales tax the same way for a business.
Representative, it is because currently that type of form is different than the sales and use tax form for other vendors. And so it requires an additional validation. It requires different fields and it requires the form to be set up in our system.
Thank you.
Representative O'Hearn.
Thank
Vice
you,
Chair
Mr.
O'Hearn.
Chair. You mentioned you knew exactly where this came from. Have the 23 county clerks been saying, let's do this for a long time? And to go along with Representative Smith, it would save them time too, correct?
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, the answer is yes. The county treasurers almost on a monthly basis bring up this sort of return. As I was coming down here today, it's basically the third most voiced concern that I hear in my experiences with the county treasurers. And so, yes, it would likely save them administrative frustration, burden. And then from the department side, yes, as Christy mentioned, it would save us time as well.
Yes, Representative Wiley.
Yeah, with all this time saving and stuff, you know, we have this upfront cost coming out of the general fund, but do you see it actually saving money in the long term as well?
Mr. Fanning.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, there's really a lot that goes behind that. The answer to that is no one knows. But the more, I think the better answer for that is, yes, it would be more efficient in the long run. County treasurers send in a lot of money to the state, and which filters down into the county and to the local communities. So I'm not necessarily saying it would save money in the long run as far as administrative costs or anything along that, but streamlining, yes, absolutely.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. Appreciate you guys' time this year, especially. You guys have been all over the place, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
All right, we'll open this bill up for public comment. Any public comment on House Bill 1229? I'm in the wrong bill. I do have some online. Go ahead and let them in, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. This is Emily Parvasini. Can you hear me and see me?
We can. Thank you so much for
Great.
joining us. It looks like you're snowed in over in Pinedale as well, so
Yeah, it's that time of year.
please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Emily Parvasini. I am the Sublette County Treasurer, and I am also the current president of the County Treasurers Association. So I'm coming today to talk to you about the House Bill 229, the sales tax issue. I personally, in my county, already I'm paying the state using an ACH. I don't send them a check in the mail. I literally hit print for the report, put it in an envelope and mail it and send the money electronically. So as far as cost savings or anything like that, I don't see that it would be any different for my county, but I don't know what the other counties do. In relation to the payment of sales tax electronically to county treasurers for vehicle purchases, some of our counties are already doing this in a way. Most of us have online payment portals that you can use to pay with either an e-check, a credit card, or a debit card. People call in and say, hey, my paperwork is there. I'm in Arizona. Can you tell me what my sales tax is? And I'll get it sent in. And we figure that dollar amount and they go online and they pay it online. Works slick. It's no problem at all. The portion of this that concerns me a little bit is just allowing someone to sign into a web page and put in how much money they spent for a vehicle and have it say, okay, here's your dollar amount that's due. Because looking at the invoices, especially from dealerships, are tricky. There's no one size fits all. And so there's a lot of things that us as county treasurers have to take into consideration before we are actually able to collect sales tax on a vehicle purchase. So some of the things that we look for is, number one, is the payer a resident of your county? In order for someone to pay sales tax in Sublette County, they need to live here at least 6 months plus 1 day to be considered a resident. If they have a cabin up at Bondurant and they live in Sweetwater County, Rock Springs, and they come up and spend 2 weeks in the summer and they want to pay sales tax in Sublette County, well, we're 4% and Sweetwater County is 6%. Of course, they're going to want to pay 4%. But because they're not technically a resident, I can still collect their sales tax at the Sweetwater County rate, but not at the Sublette County rate. So that's one of the things that we do is we verify, are they a resident of the county? Do they actually live in your county? Number two, trade-in. If there's a trade-in on the vehicle or for the one that they bought, the names have to have similarities. So the truck that you traded in is in the husband's name and the car you just purchased is in the wife's name. You don't get any sales tax credit for that. There has to be a shared name. And that's one of the things that a person wouldn't realize, and most people don't realize, is when your trade-in has a different name, than what you're buying, you are not allowed sales tax credit. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Are the items on the invoice taxable or not? The county treasurers requested that the Department of Revenue put together like a cheat sheet, if you will, for all of us in relationship to whether items are taxable or not. And you'd think it'd be pretty cut and dried. Dock fees are taxable. Windshield wiper replacements are taxable. Anything that's a tangible item is taxable, but anything that is not, that would be considered a service contract, is not taxable. So the Department of Revenue said, submit all of your cheat sheets and we'll put together a list for everybody so that all the counties can use the same cheat sheet. Well, that did not work well. And it ended up that the Department of Revenue said it would be 25 pages long and it really wouldn't help anybody. So looking at those items on an invoice, we sometimes have to call the dealership and find out, what is this item? Is wheel and tire replacement wheels and tires? So now it's a tangible thing. So now it's tax. Or is it insurance that if you break down because you have a flat tire, someone's going to come out and rescue you? Then it's a service. So those items are all very nitpicky and one size does not fit all. So we need to take that into consideration as well when we're talking about taxability. Is the purchase date of the vehicle within 65 days? If they're outside of that 65-day mark, so now they're into penalty and interest phase. So in order for them to pay online without a dollar amount already given to them from the county treasurer, that may not take into consideration any penalties or interest if it's outside that 65-day window. But with that in mind, has the vehicle even entered the state of Wyoming yet? So we have a little caveat that the sales tax does not start until the moment it drives into Wyoming. So if this person is in Arizona for the winter, they bought this vehicle, they're not going to register it until they're ready to come home in May when the snow maybe melts. They have a little bit of extra time. So we have them fill out an affidavit of fact that it hasn't come into the state, and the clock starts ticking on that sales tax when they bring it into the state. So those are all things that we take into consideration when we're talking about sales tax for a vehicle purchase. So I think that this is okay as far as people paying online. I don't think any of us really have a problem with it. I know there are a couple of counties that do not have an online payment portal where people can go on there and just charge a credit card. And in those counties, people would have to call the county treasurer and pay with a credit card over the phone. I think we just need to add maybe some language that says that it needs to be pre-approved, a pre-approved amount or pre-authorized by the county treasurer, so that if they are remitting an electronic payment online for sales tax, they're at least remitting the correct amount. The only other thing I was going to say is, if people just pay a dollar amount, they know they paid $5,000 for this truck, they bought it last week, and they're going to pay 4%. They put 4% in, they go ahead and pay it. Well, if it's not correct, now we've received that money, and because it doesn't work for what the sales tax that's due, do we hold the money? Do we return the money? Do we process it without it being correct? It causes a lot of problems for the county if we just get a random dollar amount, but we don't actually see the paperwork. So we literally have to see the invoice, the bill of sale, the title, in order to make a determination as to what the sales tax amount is that's due. And I would stand for any questions.
Any questions for, and I was almost going to murder it, but Miss
Parvasini, yes.
Parvasini. All right, that's close. Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, if somebody buys a vehicle out of state and it sits there for a year and a half and then they bring it into state, it's never been plated anywhere. When they bring it into state, that's when the sales tax begins. If it's never been plated anywhere else.
Ms. Parvasini?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stivar, correct. The time doesn't start ticking for sales tax until it enters the state of Wyoming. It is not a taxable event for Wyoming until it comes into the state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, seeing nothing further, thank you so much and appreciate all your work.
Thank you.
Any further public testimony on House Bill 229? I do have a question, Mr. Fanning, if you wouldn't mind coming back up real quick. I do have a question. And since this is a little outside of the bailiwick area for us and typically would be sitting over in the Revenue Committee, I imagine they would probably have a better answer or a better question for this. But as Ms. Parvasini was just bringing up on the idea that this is a very permissive bill. It says they may. So there may be some counties that don't allow this, but if in the case that she says, hey, I bought a boat for $10,000 and I want to pay my taxes, do you guys implement and or draft the rules on how that would ultimately be brought together in consultation with the county treasurers? Or is this something that the county treasurers would allow on their own?
Mr. Chairman, yes, this is a partnership between the department and the county treasurers. Now, in our statutes for sales tax on motor vehicles, there's a lot of authority that's given to the county treasurers. And so then the department kind of acts as their administrative authority. And so when Emily was discussing the tax due portions of it, or when things come into the state, yes, that is done in consultation with the department. However, there are times when just like with county assessors and county treasurers, there are slight differences, but the department maintains consistency as best it can.
Okay, so a follow-up to that would be, do you feel that there needs to be authority for rulemaking to ensure that if this were to go into place, that we give the authorization for you guys to get into rulemaking to make sure that this is administered correctly with the counties? Or is that something you guys already have the authority to do? This doesn't extend beyond what you guys already have the authority to do.
Mr. Chairman, yes, we do have rulemaking authority in most cases. And we do have a section in our Department of Revenue Rules, Chapter 2, where we outline some of these. The difference here with sales taxes on motor vehicles and the titles. And so we do have specific rules that outline this collaboration with the county treasurers.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fanning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Committee,
Mr. Chairman.
with that, we will go ahead and close public comment. Bill's back up to the dais. What is the pleasure of the committee? It is moved by Obermueller and seconded by O'Hearn.
Do we need to adopt the?
If you would like to place that amendment, you're more than welcome to move that amendment. Representative Wiley.
I would like to make the motion to move the amendment from 131-23.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Wiley and Berger. Any questions on the amendment or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the proposed amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. That amendment passes. With that committee, this is a fairly simple bill, pretty much repeated information. I don't feel the need to go through this page by page. Any questions or comments on the bill? Representative Pendergrift.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to make an amendment on page 6, line 21. Amended to read, the taxes imposed shall be, we would add calculated and before collected. So it would read, the taxes imposed shall be calculated and collected by the county treasurer. I believe that that might resolve the question that was brought up by their testimony. Yeah, this is down under vehicle, however.
Okay, so there is a motion. Need a second for any discussion.
Second.
Seconded by Stivar. The motion is to insert on line 21 shall be collected and calculated. Is that correct? Calculated and collected?
Mr. Chairman, I said calculated and collected, yes.
Okay.
The same.
Okay. That is existing statute. And before we start amending this, I am going to go grab our current statute books really quick. So let me go take a look because there may be authority already underneath this 39-16-107.
$39.16.107.
3916-107, yes. And then this is A1.
A1B, A boost payment would be in B.
Gonna be all the way down to B.
And double I. Yeah. Taxes imposed shall be collected by the county treasurer.
Okay, so Representative Pendergraft, just a quick cursory review. I don't see any major flaws with your amendment, and I certainly don't not approve of it. My only thought is implementation of this. So this would require the county treasurer to, or the individual to take their information to the county treasurer, have it then be calculated, and then they could turn around and go home and pay. Or I guess what I'm trying to look at is how this would go into practice.
I'm just thinking that it's possible that this could all be done through emails or some other electronic passage. And it may, if Representative Wiley has brought up some other, and I would invite him to make his point, it may be superfluous and not needed. So I would open it up to the committee to judge that.
Please, committee, this is what we do here is we work bills and make them better. So Representative Wiley?
I just think as written and brought forth to us, it's kind of a county by county determination anyway. So I don't really see why we'd have to touch existing statute.
Okay, anybody further? Okay, all those in favor of proposed amendment right now, that would be to insert the word calculated, sorry, before collected, on lines 21 and 22, please say aye. All those opposed, no. Okay. All right, committee, any further amendments, questions, or comments?
Question.
Question being called. Diana, would you please call roll on House Bill 229?
Okay, Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Nemec,
Aye.
Representative Overmuller,
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft,
Aye.
Representative Smith,
Aye.
Representative Stivar,
No.
Representative Wiley,
Aye.
Chairman Brown.
Aye.
That's 8 ayes and 1 no, do pass with amendments.
And Representative Wiley, this will need to go reappropriated, or Larson, sorry, will need to be reappropriated to committee number 2. So I will ask that you be there to present this to committee number 2. Okay. All right, and we have about 15 minutes left, so we can probably dive in and at least get ourselves started on House Bill 154. Representative Banks. All right, Representative Banks, please go ahead. The floor is yours. And what we will do is we'll go through as much as we can today. And if we can't finish it up, we'll push you over to Thursday to continue.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This committee, I bring to you today House Bill 154. I'll try to be as brief as I can, but get you the details of the bill. This bill is designed and in reference to two main issues, and one is to combat the loss of revenue in businesses by those going out of state to license their vehicles in states that already allow permanent registration. We kind of drive business out of state by being non-competitive with states around us that do allow that. The second is to give people some relief from rising costs, inflation, et cetera. And the targets for this and what we will see mostly this effect is farmers who have old farm pickups that have stayed on the place decades, and elderly populations also who've owned their vehicles for decades or longer. And the ability to give some relief is another thing this bill wishes to present. So going into the bill here, we just have the presentation on page 1, but I want to turn your attention to page 2. What we add to existing statute is right there in section A, Roman numeral I, annually, not later than the last day of annual registration month, or, and this is what we add, if applicable, and if the owner chooses permanently under the statute. So what this does is it gives, and I'll turn your attention to page 3, the ability to permanently register your vehicle if it's not a commercial vehicle and if it's 11 years old. Okay, so it has to be older than 10 years. So older vehicles. So brand new vehicles, you buy a 2022, it doesn't qualify. Page 4, we get into what the costs will be. So I mirrored this piece of legislation after kind of something we see in both Montana and Idaho of how they go about it. And so the administrative fee is $87.50 plus 5 times what you're currently paying on your current registration for your vehicle. So that covers those fees, and with that fee amount, the $87.50 times your 5 times what you currently pay, you have the opportunity to be able to register your vehicle permanently in the state of Wyoming. Just below that, it talks about you can't transfer it. So when you permanently register your vehicle, that's your vehicle, and those license plates are not transferred to the new owner. Your license plates stay with you. Let's see here. Same as current, and that's a current practice. If you sell your vehicle, then registration needs to be obtained by the new owner. The only other addition to current statute is on page 6. So there, upon transfer of ownership of a vehicle that was permanently registered, the permanent registration of that vehicle expires, has to be removed, and the original owner will have to apply for his own permanent registration. So that's the basics of the bill in a nutshell. If I need to slow down, I can. I'll just say when our County Commissioners Association was here, I spoke to them about it. Very in favor of it, supportive of it. I spoke with a few of our other county officials throughout the state. They saw that this was an opportunity to increase efficiency in their office and relieve paperwork and all those things, and just allow a lot more flow through their office. So it was good to have support of that on this bill. And if that, I will stand for questions as you might have them.
Vice Chair O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The state to our north and to the west, they both charge $87.50. Where'd you come up with that number?
Representative Banks.
To be honest, that was just the number that they have in their law. And so to just make it to allow the state of Wyoming to be competitive with the states around us, I thought that number could just level the playing field to retain it with our state as well.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You stole my thunder. I was wondering about that number 8750, and the question then, Representative Banks, did you run that by any of the current treasurers?
Representative Banks.
I didn't have a chance to speak with the treasurers, but when the county officials were here, they liked the system of having the 8750, and there could have been a treasurer in there that I just had forgotten it was a treasurer, but they liked the 8750 and the 5 times the current amount that they are paying.
Hold on just a second. I have Representative Nemec.
Mr. Chairman, just a simple question. Motorcycles are included in this, correct? Motorcycles will be included in this?
That's a good question. I don't see why not, because the
things that are provided in the subsection are just that it's not a commercial vehicle and that's older than 11 years. So unless I'm proven wrong, I believe that motorcycles can be done permanently as well.
No personal effect there, right? Representative Nemec? Representative Wiley.
Representative Banks, is there a reason that you pick 11 years?
Representative Banks.
So again, to just remain with continuity with the states around us, that was their practice. So it wouldn't be really logical for brand new vehicles to be able to do it. You buy a 2022, you buy it, permanently register it. It gives kind of a longevity of, I've owned this vehicle now. It's an older vehicle. And that's why we're trying to balance here, I guess, the funding of what we make off of new vehicles versus what we make off of vehicles older than 11 years old. And giving the relief of vehicles that are older than that, so that you're paying my pickup's a 2005. I pay $270. That rate will continue to increase over. I've seen it increase the past 3 or 4 years. So what we want to do is let the people who have those older vehicles that continue to appreciate pay the one-time fee and be able to continue to have those vehicles permanently registered. The newer vehicles, that's not the case. You're going to be paying a lot more on a 2002 than you're going to be paying on a 2005. So it was just a balancing act to pick that 11 years old versus starting it at new vehicles, just to allow the funding and such.
Any further questions? Representative Banks, my question is, what do other states do as far as their licensure on these? Are these property taxed like they are in Wyoming, or are these license plates that they pay just a license plate fee? How are the taxes, or what does this look like in these other states that have this permanent registration?
Rephrase that again. I'm not quite following.
So in the state of Wyoming, your property tax is when you buy your license plate, it's paid as a property tax. And I'm just curious what the other states, whether or not these are licensed as property taxes, or if these are inputted into their highway fund or county road fund, or whatever the case may be. I see a fiscal note, and as I was reading through the fiscal note, I do become very concerned about the impact to our local communities and the school foundation account. So I'm curious what the other states do as far as the levy of their property tax, or whether this is just a license fee.
As far as I know, I didn't really look into that part of the other states, but when we drafted this, it was an exact mirror of those other 2 states. So I can't speak really to Idaho, but Montana does it this way as well. And with talking about the fiscal note, when I showed this, because I had a concern about it as well, when I showed it to our county officials, they thought that was highly exaggerated. I spoke to county attorney as well as some other officials, and they said that was highly exaggerated because we don't know the amount of vehicles that people are going to buy in the next 2 years, license in the next 5-10 years. I think this goes out to 2025. Because especially in one of our counties, when I spoke, they said they're mostly dealing with new vehicles. People buy up to 2010 or 2013. They drive it for a couple of years, buy a brand new one, drive that for a year or 2, buy a brand new one. This doesn't affect any of that. So that funding will stay. I would like to talk a little bit more with some people about that fiscal note, because it is a concern, but from the county officials I spoke to, they said that was exaggerated a bit. So that was the concerns I had as well about it.
Thank you. And I would just say, the fiscal notes, when they're put together by the agencies that put these out, and this is literally just an estimation. And that's what they put in there. They do their best. It's kind of a tough one, but they're saying if 50% of them draw on, this is what the actual numbers would be. What is nice is they can tell us those figures, right? So they've got this information. They can say if it was 25, it was 75%. They can give us those figures definitively. So any further questions for Representative Banks? Representative Berger.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would also like clarification on the question of, is this a property tax or is this a vehicle tax? Just to know, are we getting rid of it? Will it go into property or be applied to the property tax as a property tax?
Representative Berger, this would maintain the same, according to the fiscal note, this would maintain the same delineation. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
One more question.
Representative Wiley.
Representative Banks, do you have any idea what percentages there are between vehicles newer than 11 years and vehicles older than 11 years on the road right now that we are having registered?
Representative Banks.
Not numbers specifically, but when we drafted this, it was about 50-50. There was vehicles that this would apply to that are over that 11 years accounted for about 50%. And then vehicles newer than this accounted for about the other 50%.
And Representative Wiley, based off the fiscal note, about 61% of all registered vehicles in Wyoming would be eligible for the permanent registration. So that's okay. That's okay. Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has there been any modeling? Is this totally modeled as a convenience thing of paying it now and not having to pay it forever? Or is there ultimately a serious decline in the revenue of the state if you implemented this?
Representative Banks.
I would say this is going towards relief of people who need some relief in these rising costs. Again, our farmers and elderly populations who have vehicles that are old. I spoke to a couple farmers, all their pickups are from the 1990s. And when their fees continue to grow up and they say, why do I have to keep paying increasing costs on these pickups? And so just giving the ability to be able to permanently register your vehicles in the state and to grant them some relief. And then on the other side as well, we are seeing revenue lost to other states. I've spoken to representatives from, and not representatives just in this body, but I mean, citizens from all over the state. From where I am, it's Montana, on the western side, Idaho, and then South Dakota. We lose business and revenue with people who go across the state lines because they have laws that they can permanently register their vehicles. And it saves them money to do so. And so instead of doing it in state, we lose them to out of state. And so if we have the ability to bring them back in and we mirror the states around us, so we're competitive so that they stay here and we retain their business and retain that revenue, then that's one of the intentions of this bill as well.
Follow up?
Just to follow up, that's illegal, isn't it? To register in other states and have the vehicles here?
On
Representative.
On paper, it is, yes.
And I will also say that we did pass a law that if they're caught, they are fined heavily. So I also want to make sure that I understand, you have mentioned twice now that you've seen increased costs in your registration on a vehicle that is older than 6 years old. The only way that would be happening is if your county taxes have adjusted. And so those, once you depreciate past 6 years, those fees are exactly the same. So if you have seen an increase, it's due to either the voters of your county and or something along those lines. But I just want to make sure that, when we say something, it's certainly broadcast and held in for record that we don't see increases in vehicle fees after 6 years at a state level. This would certainly be only at the county level that these property taxes are levied. So
thank you for that clarification.
Committee, we are at 2:16. So Representative Banks will go ahead and adjourn for the day today, but we will invite you back. You'll be first up on the docket for Thursday afternoon.
Thank you.
With that, we're adjourned.